Tonight, Hurricane Darby is a Category 4 in the Eastern Pacific. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for July 12th. So the star of the show right now, unopposed indeed, is Hurricane Darby, a Category 4 hurricane. Some thought it wouldn't be possible in a year like this in the Eastern Pacific, but its smallness has probably helped it along, and it is really churning. We'll talk about it in a moment. In the Atlantic, day 42 of hurricane season, and we've marked a low chance of development in the main development region for a potential area of interest. We'll take a proper look at that soon. Also worth mentioning the other area of interest around the Gulf of Mexico. The Eastern Pacific shows a moderate chance for the next tropical cyclone to form in the shadow of Darby. This is that time of year where things will just come in a parade of one after the other in the Eastern Pacific. That's July for you. But Darby, the second major hurricane of the season. Western Pacific, we've now dropped all areas of interest and there's now nothing on the radar, which is quite a flop compared to what we were looking at a few days ago with two areas of interest which looked like they both could have had a chance of forming. And in the Indian Ocean, it is also dead here, as you would more expect. Although there has been one or two hints from the GFS that there might be something going on up there. Indeed, there was an area of interest that was invested along the coast of India. So let's take a look first at some satellite imagery across the Atlantic Ocean right now, and you can see how things are looking there. There's a low pressure system moving just north of Puerto Rico, lots of dryness associated with it. All the moisture is up around that frontal system, pushing off the United States, quite a lot in the Gulf as well, and down into the southwest Caribbean Sea, but generally dry air is king. In the Eastern Pacific, obviously you can see Darby and you can see its size compared to the ocean. It is a pretty small hurricane. Behind it, a little wave moving along there. That's not the one that we've tagged though. The one that we have is just emerging off the coast of Central America, and you can see a lot of moisture over there. And here's some up close floater imagery of Darby right now, mesoscale I should say actually, from GOES 17. Fantastic imagery of a great storm once again, really showing its power there on that visible imagery. National Hurricane Center at their last advisory going with 140 mph winds, and a pressure I think was 954 or something to that effect. Cloud tops have been fair, just hovering just short of the minus 70 degree mark. The eye temperature has been pushing 20 degrees Celsius, so it's really looking very good. And of course you can see right down to the surface through that eye, so you can tell it is as deep pretty much as it can be. Powerful storm. In the Western Pacific, latest imagery, you can still see those two areas of interest and the moisture and convection associated with them, but they're just not getting themselves together. And this is the sloppy time of season in the Western Pacific, as we know. Things are always trying to form together, and you very rarely, or fairly rarely, get to see something on its own that really stands out amongst the crowd, as it were. In the Indian Ocean, things quite busy there. You saw a little bit of rotation moving into India associated with that invest, but generally it's pretty quiet. There's also a loose little bit of convection in the Southwest Indian Ocean too, but I'm not suggesting that will become something. And in the Southern Hemisphere, the Southern Pacific, a frontal system moving through there just south of Fiji and New Caledonia, but generally a fairly calm picture. New South Wales looks to be getting a band or two of rainfall there too, but in general fairly quiet. Sea surface temperatures across the Eastern Pacific, where Darby is right now, around 27 to 28 degrees Celsius, and they'll start to tail off very soon. In about 2 days time it will be falling down to 25 degrees. Gulf of Mexico piping hot, over 30 degrees Celsius, and the main development region we're looking at around 26 to 28 degrees depending on where exactly that area of interest might travel. But yeah, check out the Gulf there and the Gulf Stream, very warm areas, something to watch for very closely entering the peak season soon. Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal, well above average. Well, I don't know actually if it's well above average, but warm. And in the Western Pacific, temperatures also decent too, pushing 30 degrees Celsius across the South China Sea. The upwelling from Chaba appears to be mostly gone now, and in the Philippine Sea, very warm as well, 30 degrees plus, particularly around the 20-degree mark. And very warm waters extending up the East China Sea as well, just to note there, 26 degrees, extending all the way up to central Honshu, Japan. So here are the anomalies, and you can see some massive warmer anomalies in the higher latitudes of the Western Pacific. In the lower latitudes, the La Nina really starting to come in through the equatorial zone in the Western Pacific even. The Eastern Pacific is starting to become less apparent actually, and in the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico sticking out like a sore thumb there. The oceanic heat content also very high values in the Gulf and in the Western Caribbean Sea, so those are the areas to watch, also starting to increase around the Bahamas. Eastern Pacific, it's been relatively low, but I reckon Darby probably tracked very close to some of the higher points there. Western Pacific looking very good for oceanic heat content. Eastern Pacific is starting to come along just a little bit though, especially along the coast of Mexico. Let's check some models then. First of all, looking at the Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific, and you can see there briefly that area of interest around Louisiana with tropical storm force winds briefly moving inland. And looking at the Eastern Pacific, you can see that system forming in the next 5 days, the one that we've marked at 60%, becoming a much larger tropical storm than Darby was, and could have a decent future ahead of it too, and that one could threaten the coast of Mexico a little bit more directly than previous storms have, so that's on to watch. Check the Atlantic out. You can see forming in the Eastern Atlantic here, an area of interest tries to get itself going. There it is, developing tropical storm force winds for a little while and trying to become a tropical cyclone. Whether it manages that or not, well, it doesn't look like it at the moment. GFS and I think it was the Icon are the only ones really developing it into a low pressure system, never mind a tropical cyclone, so that's why we've got 10% on that one right now. And looking out, of course, to where the interesting one is right now, Darby. You can still see Bonnie's remnant slightly, or its influence, moving through Hawaii. But then we've got Darby, which is much more recognisable, still a hurricane for quite a while there before starting to weaken. And it now appears on the GFS model at least that it will be approaching the big island of Hawaii as a weak tropical storm and won't have dissipated completely, according to the GFS, but I don't think the National Hurricane Center is on board with that just yet. In any case, interesting to watch. Looking at the precipitation charts as well for that period, and you can see how this storm's track is entrenched there. Very clear to see from the rain profile where the storm is going. And Hawaii gets a little bit of rain beforehand, and then what's left of Darby tops it off there at around 3 inches generally on the eastern coast of the Big Island. Around 2 inches along the southern coast is what we're expecting. That's for this 7-day period, so that shouldn't be a very large amount of rain for that period. But there it is moving along, and you can still see its track there later on as well, passing the island. Well then, into the longer range, here's a look at the whole picture in the Eastern Pacific. So you can see Darby there, still holding on for a little while past Hawaii, and then this next hurricane coming through, and the GFS calling it a major hurricane by the looks of it, so it's another one if that happens, and then moves off towards the northwest. We don't have the long range of this one just because it was pretty boring. The storm there, the one that develops, dies off, moving northwestwards away from the Baja California Peninsula. That's all the serious stuff done at this point. I'd like to tell you about our merch store where you can check out our new products, including the Hone range. If you scroll down all the way to the bottom, we're celebrating 1000 days without Hone, and there's animations there that you can request too. Onto the silly range then, you can take a look at the Western Pacific as it tries and flailing around to try and develop tropical cyclones. First of all in the far eastern part of the basin at high latitude, that one fails. Then there's this one that forms near Guam, and that one succeeds, but this is the long range, don't forget, and becomes a typhoon, and up towards the northeast there looks like a second one becomes successful as well. But this is really all out there. Let's just not forget that just a few days ago we were looking at significant chances, moderate, for that area of interest near the Philippines, and it's come to diddly squat, so don't put your faith in that. July 12th, 2007, 15 years ago already, would you believe? Category 4 Man Yi was the star of the show on that day, in the just north of the Philippine Sea there, headed towards the Okinawa Islands. Category 4 maintained that intensity for a couple of days there, and it was the only thing active on this day in 2007. So we look at many of these situations on this day periods where there's only one storm active, and that happens more often than you think. Well then, let's take a look at what's coming up next in this year's hurricane naming list. In the Atlantic, the next name is Danielle. In the Eastern Pacific, it's Estelle. And in the Central Pacific, Darby is showing Hone how it's done, clearly. In the Western Pacific, the next name is Songda, and in the North Indian Ocean, we'll be looking out for Citran. Darby is the 35th named storm, or nameable storm, of this year so far. Considering the average is 92, there's still a long way to go. In the Southern Hemisphere, the next name is Darian in the Australian region, Ashley in the Southwest Indian Ocean, and Harley in the South Pacific. We're back with another Tropical Weather Bulletin tomorrow night.